The content you're about to enjoy comes from the archives of The Best You. We're devoted to the very best in personal development, with a platform and resources dedicated to inspiring and changing people's lives. At The Best You, we work with the world's leading writers and trainers on the evolution of the self, and people whose journeys have been affected by their work and words. These Best You EXPO talks are recorded in front of a live audience in a live event. We highly recommend that you focus on the message. As they say, what you focus on expands. Enjoy. Ashleigh Carter. The title of her talk is Don't Think Outside the Box, Dismantle It. How not to adopt other people's version of your life as your own. Having been directly impacted by early childhood trauma and the criminal injustice system, Ashleigh Carter has developed into a vocal activist and advocate for incarcerated women as well as survivors of abuse. Enjoy this fascinating and inspiring talk. Thank
you. My name is Ashleigh Carter. I'm originally from Long Beach, California, so I'm happy to be speaking at home today. I'm going to speak about boxes and the boxes that are placed upon us and also the boxes that we like to limit ourselves with. So the very notion of thinking outside the box is putting you in one, right? Because it implies that there you are and you need to get out of it in order to be productive and you need to get out of it to be original. My philosophy is do not think outside of the box, dismantle it. Who put you in there in the first place? I came to adopt this philosophy while I was actually in a box. I am a formerly incarcerated woman, and during that very dark time in my life, I decided to dedicate myself on going in. I had a lot of time to reflect. I had a lot of time to decide on how I wanted my life to be and what were the actions and mentalities and mindsets that led me to being in the box in the first place. Upon my release, I was bombarded with negative messages of, you're a felon, you can't do this, you're limited, you won't be able to get a job, you can't, everything that people would like to have you believe to discourage you, or possibly philosophies that they've adopted themselves, those limiting mindsets that they themselves have fed into that they want to place upon you. And I refused. I just refused to accept it. And I said, no, yes, there's a job shortage. Yes, I would just agree, go along to get along kind of thing. And the minute I came home, I just hit the ground running. I knew that I had to do something that I had never done before to get the things that I had never had before. So instead of me applying for jobs, filling out applications that I knew I wouldn't get past, have you been convicted of a felony? There was just no chance that somebody would look at me on a piece of paper and say, I think this girl is great for our company, right? So I actually picked up the phone and I made a phone call to none other than the gangster gardener, Ron Finley. I'm not sure if you're familiar. But within 30 seconds of our conversation, I introduced myself and I said, hi, my name is Ashleigh Carter. I just got out of prison and nobody will hire me. And I would like to come give my time to you because I admire what you're doing. At the time, Ron Finley had just started his nonprofit organization, and he was planting gardens in South Central Los Angeles and communities like Long Beach and Compton and Watts to combat the disparities in nutrition and lack of healthy food options in the inner city. Ron Finley was a little taken back with what I said, and he said, sure, come down and see me. And that was 5 years ago. I share that story as an example of how I created my own lane and blazed that path, and I wasn't afraid to share my truth. Had I listened to the individuals who said, you'll never be able to do this, you shouldn't share this, you should be ashamed of what you've done, of who you are, I would never have made that phone call. I would never be standing here in front of you today sharing my story, and I would be living with that shame. A lot of the women that I have worked with are not able to share their stories so openly They are very ashamed because of those boxes. So one of the examples that I give them is when you go out to eat, how many times do you sit down at a restaurant and ask the waitress, what do you prefer? Every single time, right? What do you like? I'm debating between the hamburger and the macaroni and cheese. Tell me what you like. And we will literally take this other individual's story, life experiences, everything, and adopt it as our own in that exact moment over our internal voice, right? And that's insane to me because who is this person? Their life path has been something completely different than mine. Their taste buds are completely different than mine. And here I am deciding to ask them what their preference is over mine. And that's, and people, when I do that little exercise with them, they're like, oh yeah, that's true. But how often do we adopt other people's stories and take them on as our own? As women, as people of color, as whatever identifying markers you choose to accept for yourself, how often are we accepting other people's version of ourselves instead of being authentic? How much of ourselves are we suppressing? Not only that, how much of ourselves are we not even in touch with to begin with because we've accepted other people's narratives?
If you're interested in speaking, exhibiting, or getting involved in the largest personal development expos in the world, contact us today at www.thebestyouexpo.com or send us an email to info@thebestyou.co.
When I came home, I was really forced to find out who I was. I didn't know who I was if I didn't have that man. I didn't know who I was if I didn't have that title, if I wasn't doing those things. I had to completely destroy myself in order to regrow, just like a seed, right? And I love, it's an old Mexican proverb, and it says, they buried us, but they didn't know that we were seeds. And so I'm very grateful to have had those dark times in my life where I was secluded, where I was buried, where I was put away, where I was forced to go in order to break through that outer shell and sprout up. So the message that I would like to leave with all of you is, I know that it's challenging, and I know that we are constantly bombarded with stories and versions and ideas of what we should be, right? What we should look like, what we should eat, what we should say, how we should act. And fuck that. Get rid of it. Are you happy? Is what you're doing making you happy? Or are you doing it to make somebody else happy? Are you complicit and complacent in your own unhappiness? We stay in relationships that we know we shouldn't be in because we don't want our families to judge us, right? We won't get divorces. We won't break free because I don't know who I am without this person, or what will people say about me? I know I play that message in my head often. What will people think? What if I don't do well? I mean, even before I got here, I had to challenge myself with that negative, those negative thought patterns. What are people going to think of me? What am I telling myself? Am I operating from fear? Am I placing myself in this box again? Or am I being authentic? Am I speaking my truth? Am I speaking from my heart? Am I comfortable with who I am today? And if you can answer yes, or if you can answer no, then if you're answering no, then there's some work to do, yes? So that's my message, and I appreciate all of you coming out today. And if you have any questions or not. Yeah, so the work with the organization I'm currently with, okay, so as I mentioned, it's the Ron Finley Project, and we operate out of South Central Los Angeles. And the goal is to teach people about the importance of self-sustainability, health, wellness, and beauty, and the interconnectedness of all of those. So we do that through working a lot with school children and communities. We install gardens. We host community events. We have art programming. And it's really a restorative justice model, because through working with the earth and reconnecting yourself to the soil, you're able you're able to have to reconnect a part of you that's been missing, because so many of us are dependent on the current food system that we don't know where our food comes from. We don't know how to grow food. If the person at any time who was in control of the food supply were to say stop, we would starve. So essentially, we are slaves to a system. And so through reconnecting ourselves to the soil, we're able to reconnect ourselves to the innermost parts of us, right? The most basic nature in ourselves. And it's very healing, especially for what people like to call at-risk youth. We work a lot with children who are at risk. Any kid, in my opinion, that's born today is at risk, just especially when you look at young women. So the rates of women, let me start that again. Women are the highest growing population of people who are being incarcerated currently. Over the past 20 years, the rates of women going to prison have increased 700%. So when we look at that and we look at what's happening to our young girls in schools, there is a direct correlation. And also another pretty staggering statistic is that 90% of the women incarcerated are survivors or people who have learned to live with severe sexual abuse and domestic violence. And we're not addressing these issues. So one of the things that we're aiming towards now is developing a program specifically for young women. And ultimately, it's going to be a prison prevention program, but it's going to address some of the core needs that aren't being addressed for the young girls today, and just provide a safe space with them. So completely for young women, completely ran by women to offer that safe space. And it's going to have art, and it's going to have counseling, and it's going to have gardening. And whatever these girls need, we are going to allow them to dictate to us what their needs are. But unfortunately, the reality is that we are failing our young girls. And these young girls are growing up and becoming women. And the women are being chatteled into the prison industrial complex. And they're leaving behind babies. And they're not having their traumas addressed at all. And this isn't a conversation that we're having, because when we talk about mass incarceration or people being put in boxes, women are left out of that conversation. And so I do a lot of advocating around that and bringing awareness to that, because, I mean, if we're talking about healing people and being the best you, there are droves of women who are being left out and left behind and weren't given the protection or the love that they needed, and still are growing with that and aren't giving the protection and the love that they need now. It's generational, definitely. So when we look at it, it's a cycle that is repetitive. And then specifically relating to what you're mentioning, some very interesting statistics for you. Children who have mothers who are incarcerated have a 10% chance of graduating high school. The numbers are not the same for fathers, just unfortunately. And the analogy that I like to use is because women are the backbones of our families, and women are the backbones of our communities. Men are great. I'm not dissing men at all. But the reality is that women are the center of the universe and our families and our communities. So just like within a body, if women are the spine, when you remove the spine, the whole body collapses. The body cannot sustain itself without the most central component. And so when mothers go to prison, the children have a 10% chance of graduating high school, regardless of what age they were when the mother went in. Additionally, for children who are removed from their families, each time they're removed and each time they're placed and they have that trauma, right, because they can't form proper attachments, there's gray matter that develops in their brain. And so what neuroscientists are finding is that children who endure these sorts of trauma have holes that can never be filled. So there's just literally gray matter, holes, and they've correlated those holes to each time that child was removed and wasn't able to form that positive attachment. So there are a lot of different things that we're not looking at when we're talking about the holistic woman, right? And the reality is that women are the mothers. So when we're talking about the women, we need to be talking about the children too. And a lot of times the children's are the collateral consequences. You know, they endure the collateral consequences of of the choices. And I'm not saying that people are always innocent, but what I'm saying is there is an epidemic in this country, and we need to start looking at that, and we need to examine, are we really providing the individuals, specifically the women, with what they need to better themselves and with what they need to address the traumas that led them into that situation in the first place, right? Because like you said, it's generational. So if we're not equipping women, we're not equipping their children, and we're not equipping their grandchildren, and it's this constant cycle, and it's this constant barrage. Yeah. Got a little off topic, but you could tell I'm passionate about it. Yeah. Any other questions? So the Ron Finley Project is the organization that I currently work with, and the youth program that I'm developing for the girls is called Diamonds in the Rough. So I don't think there's any one answer to that. I think that as many children as we have experiencing these types of traumas, there's going to be that many answers, right? But I think it's important that we're equipping the children and their families with the proper resources in order to address it. And that may look like art therapy for one child, and that may look like cognitive behavioral therapy for another, and it may look like that child needs to be removed from that family because sometimes the abuser is a family member for another young girl. So it's really contingent on the situation, but that's why I'm very adamant about the style in which I'm developing the organization. It's going to be peer-led, so the young women will be able to dictate to us how they feel, what they feel they need to heal, and what resources they think they need. I mean, that's going to be coupled with, of course, experience and strategy. But very often what we're finding is that people are giving them one answer. Oh, you experienced this? Here's that. You'll be fixed. And that's not how we work. That's a box. Exactly. We have one solution for you. Oh, you experienced this? Then you get this. Oh, you're from here? Then you get that. You know, it's that very limited thinking, that box again. But I think it's different for each person. I think that, number one, we need to be having these conversations because it's not talked about. It's still very taboo, right? So we're not talking about the childhood sexual trauma. And so the very first thing we need to do is create a safe space for these young women to be able to address that this even happened to them in the first place, acknowledge that it is happening to them, believe them, right? And then work on going forward, creating a safe environment where this never happens again. And it's not just young women, it's young men. That's a conversation that young men are left out of as well. Women are left out of the conversation regarding incarceration. Young men are left out of the conversation regarding molestation, unfortunately. That's my time. Thank you all so very much. I appreciate you.
For more information, go to www.thebestyou.co.